Welcome, church. We're glad you're joining us for our podcast on developing 10 practices for our faith as we enter into more difficult parts of our life. And these practices help connect us to God. This week is all about humility, and today is about the freedom of confession. My name is Rustin.
I'm Tammy.
And I'm Mike.
And we're glad that you're joining us as we talk about confession. So I grew up Baptist, and in my world, we didn't talk a lot about confession. If you were talking anything about confession, it was really about like, you got to get an accountability group, right? And you found your accountability group. And I remember for me, my kind of first experience of that was with my best friend Dino, who is a missionary in Kenya now. And we had kind of started meeting together. His wife and one of the other youth workers were engaging, and we just had this moment of like deep honesty. We were both shared. It wasn't like this intentional, we're going to be accountability, right? But it was this, hey, we just feel like we need to be really honest with each other. I remember leaving that night. I'm a journaler and have been for a long time. And so that night I handed Dino about 25 of my journals and said, this is everything about me. And Dino handed me a Post-it note with everything on his. And that's the difference of our culture, right? That's the difference of our personalities. But it was kind of an unveiling for both of us about who we were. And I remember the freedom and the connection to God that I felt in those moments. Have either of you had a confession experience where you felt more connected to God, more engaged in that in a way that is, you can tell on the video?
I actually would say I'd had the opposite. And growing up Lutheran with a very traditional liturgical style, I memorized the confession and I didn't even have to look at the book. And I was very proud of myself for not having to look at the hymnal, but I didn't actually confess anything. And then getting to talk to my dad, who, his family was Catholic, and every year he'd, confess to eating watermelon or whatever he gave up during Lent. And so it was like, he would come up with sins because he knew he needed to say something. And so those were like my two inauthentic experiences of confession of like, okay, rote memorization of something that I didn't actually know the words for, and making up sins because I knew I had to say something.
And then for me, growing up in the Assemblies of God, it was, what's your deepest, darkest sin? And confession was all about, revealing the depth of your depravity.
And as a 7-year-old, it's like, I hit my sister again.
Yeah, but as you head into your teenage years and your adult years, it's like, okay, these sins just get worse. And so what do I choose to reveal or not reveal? And for me, confession was always this guarded act, right? I couldn't do what you did, Rustin. Here's my journals, because I'd be too concerned about, okay, what are you going to find in them?
Yeah. And I think, what made that expression of confession meaningful was who it was with, right? Like Dino and I had this depth of relationship that we had built that only took it deeper versus it being some, isolated, whether it's a priest behind a wall or, and again, I see real value in that as well. I think there is real value of going to our pastors and priests and saying, hey, I just need to get this off my chest. And I think it's also okay just to say that to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
There's this space, but I think there is something really palpable about doing that communally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think there's this part of, like you talked about, the freedom that you felt, right? Mm-hmm. When I really just let you know who I am, and there's no more veils, there's no more walls, and here I am, whether you like it or not, take me, right? Mm-hmm. And I find it easier sometimes to do with someone I don't know, a priest, or,
that's part of the benefit of it.
Yeah. And so, but there's something so deep that happens when you can confess in relationship, and I have experienced moments where I've been able to unveil my true self, and it's been tears, really tearful moments for me where here I am.
I do love, she mentions in this story, Brother Lawrence, who in his book, Practicing the Presence of God, talks about that we can spend a lot of time beating ourselves up for our sins. Yeah. And that how unhelpful that is too, that this kind of Middle Ages wrap barbed wire around your leg and smack yourself with a whip is actually not helpful. And Brother Lawrence talks about that anytime he got off the path, that he sinned or whatever, he would just say, God, this is what happens when I get off track with you. so I'm sorry, help me get on back track, right? And then just moved on with his day. I think there is something really beautiful about that, of as we live more authentically, and don't feel like we have a duffel bag full of our chaos, that then we can, as we release that, then we can just say, yeah, God, this is what happens.
Admit it. I've gotten off track.
Yeah.
Help me to get back on.
Yeah. And that's, again, as we talk about a practice of humility, that kind of evaluating, that's the 5-minute faith builder for this week, or for today, is like kind of evaluate where you are on that line. Like, how able are you to just be like, okay, God, I'm with you. And I wasn't, and I am, and thank you. Right. And so that's kind of the challenge for today is, where do you need to confess? Say those things to Christ, say those things to God. And remember that confession is the path to connection, right? It's where we connect with God. So don't be afraid, because God's grace is always ready for you. May you find a path of humility today.